And we're live. Hello, friends. We're going to do office hours. And office hours is a good time for you to ask me any question that you have, and I'll do my best to answer. And yeah, let me just grab this because I do not do anything in the chat over here. If you're chatting over here, that's fine. I just won't ever read it. So if you want to interact, then you're going to come to Discord. You can go to kcd.im/office hours. You'll get to this page, and then I'll show you the Discord and everything. Yes, you can come to the Discord, and this is where questions come from. This is where I post links to answers and all of that stuff. And then also I focus on questions that are asked in the Zoom call. And so if you want to make sure that your question is answered, then come into the Zoom call, and I give priority to people who are in the Zoom call. So with that, let's get started. Who in the Zoom call has a question they'd like to ask? And if there aren't any, then that is fine, because we've got a couple in the Discord anyway. So, okay, we'll just go straight to that then. Okay, so let me find where the last answered question was. Okay, yeah, I remember that. Okay, yeah, we got that answer too, I think. Okay, so starting with this one from Reactist. My experience with OAuth 2 using React 15 and Node. Yeah, so I guess I'm not sure what specifically they're asking about, but yes, I do have experience with OAuth 2. It's not fun, but I normally just cobble around, figure out their docs. If you're lucky, then the whatever API that you're interacting with will have like a client library that you can just use. But often not. Like with Discord, I've used their both actually used the bot flow and also just hitting HTTP endpoints and stuff. I don't really have any resources specifically to point you to. Nothing that I've used. I know there are many out there, but yeah, I don't have anything I can recommend. I guess that's all I can say about that one. Okay, yeah, Artem asked me a question about a TypeScript library template that he shared with me. It was in a private DM, so I'm going to move this over and find that. Let's see. Right, yeah. Okay, cool. So create TypeScript library. It's a template repo. And first I'll say that as far as generators and template things like this go, I don't use it unless I wrote it. At least not for anything real that I build. I will use something like Create React App, but actually even that I have I stole this idea from Ryan Florence, but he has this .crap with two P's. So create React app pp. I don't know. And this is like all the dependencies installed. This is up to date. Create React app. And the nice thing about this is that now I can instead of saying like npx create React app, yada, yada. Or I'm pretty sure you could say npm create and then React app. That does that too. It's kind of fascinating. But instead of having to do that and having to download and dependencies and stuff, I can actually work completely offline. I just say in any directory, crap my app, and it will copy all of the files from that directory over here. And so it actually, I am still using my setup, like what I decided how I wanted things to work. It takes a while to copy it all over, but I don't have to be online for that to work. Anyway, my feelings on generators and templates and stuff like that, I really don't like using them unless I wrote them. And not just because I feel like I'm better or whatever, but because I feel like if I just take whatever some library or something created for me, I don't really understand the different decisions and trade-offs that were made. And so, yeah, I don't typically use something like that. Now, I do have my own generator for my open source stuff. That's why all my open source stuff looks so similar, because it's all using the same generator. And that's generator KCD OSS. And so, yeah, I use this to generate all my stuff. And this is a Yeoman generator, and it works great. Okay, anyway, with all that said, let me delete this thing because I don't need it. My app.
I feel like with templates and stuff, what can happen as well is it can, or in my experience, a lot of templates out there get easily outdated, and that is also one thing where I'm like, of course, Create React app is awesome, and in my opinion, it gets it's maintained and stuff, but community templates oftentimes get outdated, or from my experience. So I'm careful there as well.
Yeah, one problem with templates is that you have like, it's like we make all these decisions for you and we have like 30 dependencies in the package JSON. We're just going to land that with you, but you're responsible for keeping that up to date and everything. And if this is something that you want to like just build something really quick and then nobody's maintaining it or whatever, then that's fine. But if this is something you want to maintain over time, then that's not as cool. And that's actually why I built KCD scripts, so that I could have all of those dependencies in the one package. And then updating is very straightforward. So yeah, things can fall out of date. So I'm just gonna share a couple of the things that I've been talking about while I'm thinking about it, before I actually get into finally answering Artem's question. So Artem just wanted to have some feedback on this library, or on this template. I can say that like um, the README looks pretty fine. Having a motivation is a good idea, like the why behind the library. I like to have that up at the top as well. And if you look at my generator, in the template README, whoops, that is not the right file. There we go. Yeah, lots of this is like generated at generation time. But yeah, having the problem, the solution, that's kind of like the motivation. I also have a table of contents that may or may not be totally necessary depending on how many or how much documentation there is for this particular thing. Having some instructions on installation. Keep in mind that some people may or may not be super experienced with installing things like your thing. Like it could be that your library is the first time anybody has used npm before, and so that's why I go above and beyond and explain that it's distributed via npm, which is bundled with Node, and there are links to those things so people know exactly what those are. And then yeah, API documentation goes in usage. I like to talk about like what inspired the creation of this thing, and if there are other solutions that make different trade-offs, I like to list those, and then explain how you can create issues and different things. And then I use all contributors. I think that is really nice. It's a fair amount of extra work, but I think is worthwhile. And then license. So you've got most of that same sort of thing in here. So I think your stuff is fine, but maybe consider some of those other things. So one thing that I noticed when I looked at this first was the separation between source and test. For me, I like to keep those two things together. And so I just have source and then I have my tests right here. And that, like, as the file structure grows and everything, I just keep everything right next to it. And as it is, the way that you have, oh, and you've made some changes. The way that you have things set up, you don't have to do .. because you've got tsconfig all set up so that you can just say, from the root directory down. So you don't have to worry about all the ... madness, but I still think that co-locating the tests has some benefit. And I've got a blog post about this that I will add to my list of links that I'm sharing here. Yeah, and I've got, yeah, a section on tests in here. Okay, so yeah, there's a jest config. I guess that's nothing to say that with that. The rollup config. So this is the other thing, and the motivation behind KCD scripts is, you notice you have the configuration for tests and configuration for rollup. In my libraries, I don't have to worry about having that configuration most of the time because it's all built into KCD scripts. And so if I need to make a change to the configuration or whatever, I just make that in KCD scripts and then I upgrade and I don't have to change anything. And even in certain situations where I need to have a config file, I can actually have that shared inside of KCD scripts. So I generate this file and I never need to touch it no matter what, even if I need to change the Husky configuration or whatever. So that's really nice. You can't really do that for get ignore and get attributes and stuff like that, but you don't often need to change those files anyway. So that's never been a very big problem. So yeah, that's another thing to consider is maybe you could create your own scripts library that has like your formatting and your tests and your building and all of that stuff all just baked into the library. And then you use that library in your template. This is really useful if you have more than like 3 or 4 libraries. Once you start getting quite a bit more and you start developing different opinions and want to change things, just can be a lot easier to have all that in one place. And same with ESLint configuration. I have ESLint config can't see odds, which is quite useful here. And I'm going to do KCD scripts right there too. But yeah, that is really nice because now I just handle all of that in here. And this is like a smart config too. So like if you take a look at the jest configuration, it's not just like a module exports all the config. I actually take a look at the package JSON, and if you've got testing library jest DOM, then we're gonna configure some extra rules here. And if you have testing library, then we'll configure these extra rules. So it adapts to whatever project you're using it in, making it really useful. I did the same thing at PayPal with PayPal scripts, and it worked really, really nicely. So that'd be another thing to consider. Again, like you may not want to invest a lot of work into some underlying abstraction unless there are like things you're going to build on top of that anyway, or build using that. But it's just something to think about. This practices document, I've never seen anything quite like this, and I think it's great. So yeah, I think this is cool. That's nice. Yeah, and then the rest of this is just like implementation of the library. Having a .github in here, you've got it contributing, that's cool. I normally put the contributing at the root, but I don't really have any solid arguments other than they didn't used to have the .github directory and now they do. I kind of like having contributing at the root because it just makes it more obvious, but you do a good job of making sure that the contributing guidelines are mentioned in the README, so it's doesn't really make too much of a difference there. And if I were to like make a pull request or an issue, then it would show me like, hey, check out the contributing guidelines because it's all integrated with GitHub. So that's fine. And actually, let's take a look at that really quick. Yeah, this is cool. I do a very similar thing in my contributing guidelines as well. Yeah, this is great. Okay, then we've got our, here, actually, let's just take a look at the issue template really quick. So yeah, you got bugs and features. Let's take a look at the raw, because yeah, sometimes we'll have comments in here that don't show up when it's rendered. So yep, this is great. Sometimes I see these things have just a ton of fields that you need to fill in, which I think is actually great. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, you want to get enough information that like in the process of creating the issue, they find out what the problem was. They don't need to make the issue in the first place. But also make it so that if somebody finds a legitimate bug, they're not deterred by the amount of information they need to give you. And this would all depend on how popular the library is. So for my really popular libraries, I'm fine putting up a bunch of friction between people and creating new issues because often they're going to discover that it's not the library that's the problem, but it's their implementation of the library that's the problem. And they'll figure that out in the process of creating like reproduction or whatever. Or if it's just like a really popular library, I don't want to just be flooded by a bunch of low quality issues. So But if it's not a widely used library, then I don't mind having just a handful of low quality issues. Just kind of depends. Like it's a sliding scale. But yeah, most of the time I want high quality issues, if possible. And often I'm going to ask people to solve the problem themselves anyway, because I don't solve other people's problems unless I want to, unless like it's technically interesting to me. Okay, so then you've got a workflow here, and you're building the main branch. Yeah, using checkout, action to cache. So actually, I'm guessing you looked at mine, but I'm not positive. So I'll just show you what mine looks like. So I like actually having these little emojis with the names. That's really helpful as I'm like reading through the steps to just really quickly see the stuff. This download depths from Gleb Bamatov is actually really great because he has really good caching built in there. I'm guessing that this is probably basically the same sort of thing. So I would have to look into that to get an idea, but that would be something to think about. It's interesting here that you're using yarn, but then you hash on package lock, which is NPM thing. So I would expect you'd want to do yarn lock on that, but I don't know. I haven't used this thing. So yeah, build and then test. Pretty standard stuff. I like automating my releases. So I've got this release step that which is unfortunate, but it has to build everything again. Oh, and this cancel previous runs. This is kind of useful. So if you've got a one build, like somebody pushes a commit, and then immediately thereafter they realize a problem, they push another commit, it just stops the previous build. And this is mostly useful when you're limited on, well, we are limited on the number of concurrent runs that we can have. And so especially like hardcore on Mac. So if you're running CI in Mac for some reason, then you get very few, I think like 4 or 5 at a time. And so on like per account or per organization. And so having this cancel when you're like, they pushed a new commit, I don't even care what the last commit build status is. Let's just cancel this one and we'll let that next one go. That can be kind of useful. Yeah, so that and then I have my auto release and stuff like that. So if you're not into the auto release stuff, then that's fine. So I think that's everything. Hopefully that was useful and insightful and interesting and whatever. But yeah, I think it's awesome. Make your own template and rock on. This is very strange. I just noticed GitHub is what the heck? If I refresh it, it'll fix. There we go. Programming's hard. Okay. Anyway, there's some
Do you
links
have
there.
any comments about the license?
Oh, I didn't even look at notice license. Yeah, there's no license file. It says MIT in here. I would recommend adding a license file because that's a good idea. People are often looking for that. And actually, I think that GitHub has like this little score of how complete your repo is, and a license is in there. So yeah, I'd recommend a license. I chose MIT a long time ago after reading about the different licenses and seeing what other people were doing. So that's pretty much what all my stuff is, except for my educational content, because I don't want anybody taking my educational content and then making money off of it. I think that is reasonable of me to not want people making money off of my hard work. And so what I do on that is, where's my license? I'm using GPL version 3, which allows for private or non-commercial use. So yeah, if somebody wants to make money on my material, then I ask them to contact me, at which time I will say no. I let people use my stuff to learn themselves. They can teach their coworkers, but they can't teach, and they could even like present it in a meetup or something. But if they're going to use my content, then to teach somebody, then no money exchanges hands at all in the process of doing that. Like it gets a little murky when it's like, well, I'm teaching my coworkers on the clock, I'm sort of getting paid, I guess. That's fine. I don't care about that. I just don't want anybody paying you because you're teaching the workshop based on my material. So anyway, that's the only time where I don't use MIT is for my educational stuff. Everything else is MIT because it's permissible enough, and it keeps me free of potential problems of people getting mad at me because I have a bug and I brought down production or something like that. Cool. Any other follow-up questions on that one?
Yeah, the GPL version, because I've seen this question a lot before. People want to open source things, but they don't want people making money off it. I was just interested if you could click on it and if you could see.
Yeah. So I actually followed in the footsteps of here. Let me edit my comment here to add this. Edit message. I use MIT for my OSS licenses and GPL version 3 for educational material. Okay, there we go. Wait a second. Oh, okay, there we go. So yeah, basically it pretty much just allows what I said. You can use it in private, non-commercial, but other than that, don't make money on it. That's what it is. Okay, cool. Any other follow-ups in Zoom? Sweet. So I lost my spot. Oh, here we are. And Arpan answered that. Possible to share via. Oh yeah, I got it. Working on exporting Webpack as a function. Whoa. Yeah, so Sherry, I am not sure exactly what you're talking about, but you totally can do this sort of thing. In fact, I'm pretty sure that Webpack can be like you can export your config as a function, and then that function accepts some arguments which might satisfy your use case. But in any case, like your Webpack config is a JavaScript file, so you can do anything in there. And when I was working on PayPal scripts, I did all sorts of interesting things based on the structure of the project that we were running in, like whatever the current working directory was. Yeah, just a bunch of stuff. But with the Webpack, let's take a look at the docs here really quick, because I know that config. I know you can export a function. So here, the default is to say module exports. Here's my object, but I'm sure that there is an example of using a function. Yeah, maybe not. Here, let's just look. Webpack config as a function. Configuration types. Yeah, here we go. So you accept the environment. So with Webpack, you can add the -p or -- production flag to say build this for production. And so that's what the env is all about. You have env.production. And I feel like there's something else about that. An environment as first parameter, see environment options CLI documentation for syntax examples. So take a look at that. And then argv is just the additional arguments passed to Webpack. So you could do it that way, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. But if that's not enough for you, then what you could do is have one function within your Webpack config that is is a function that returns the Webpack config and accepts any arguments. And then in the module.exports, you can call that function and pass the arguments. So you could have maybe multiple Webpack configs that each call into this other function. And then you just say, Webpack, you're going to build with this config, and then you're going to build with that config. So yes, it's totally possible to parameterize your config, however you want to do that. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah,
okay.
that helps. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. Hi, Sherry.
Hi.
Good. And not only is it possible, but it's pretty normal. I wouldn't say maybe normal, but it's definitely a thing that I've done for a highly flexible Webpack configuration for a toolkit sort of thing, like PayPal scripts. I did that with PayPal scripts.
Yeah, actually, the second option that you mentioned, that helps me. The one that is out of the box, like you configuring as a function, that didn't help me because I was trying to use the directory name as an argument, and it only accepts environment and args. So that was the thing. So
yeah, I wonder if these args could be arbitrary that you just pass. So you could say Webpack, my dir is foobar or whatever. And then I'm guessing that argv would include this, even though it's not like a Webpack configuration or like a Webpack argument. I'm guessing that that would be included in argv. It might not be. And if that's the case, then yeah, what I was suggesting with the multiple configs would be a solution for that.
all right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So Luke is asking something about testing. Let me just read this really quick. Oh, yes, translation stuff. So, yeah, you do not have the translation text up front in the UI. So in their situation, the root app has to fire an event to go get the text, and only then does the text render into view. So, boy, first of all, let me say, that is probably not a great user experience. I would strongly advise reevaluating that. Like having to do something asynchronous to render any text to the UI, that does not sound great. But I realize that sometimes those things are pretty big architectural changes that would not be easy to make. And so you just got to work with what you have. So given that, you should be able to do the same thing with a custom render function. You render the root app as part of your wrapper. And then when you render, you're just going to wait for all the text to be available before you proceed with your test. And you do that in a custom render function. It would actually be sort of similar to what I'm doing in the Bookshelf app. Boy, I've gotten so much traction or so much use out of this repo. I'm always able to show stuff from this. It's kind of like this. So here's the custom render function for our tests in the Bookshelf app. And here one thing that we're doing is I want to assume that like most of the application is only useful if you're logged in. And so the custom render function will default to logging you in as a new user. You can also pass your own user. Or if you want to, you can pass undefined and say, no, we don't have a user. So this is useful for the testing login and registration pages, stuff like that. Yeah, so most of the time we have our own user. And you notice that if we're going to generate one, it's an asynchronous operation. And so what you could do is very similar, except you would render with your app provider. So this could include like your router, everything, whatever your app providers are. Like this is literally the exact same providers that are used in my real application. Like here, let's take this over to where we actually render stuff. So right here, app providers. In the real world, in the actual application, I'm rendering the same component that's being rendered in my tests. I think that's actually really valuable to do. So if you can do that, then your root app would probably be involved there. You'd render your root app as part of the wrapper. And so then here I say I wait for the loading to finish because like we're gonna have React Query go get whatever we need to based on what page we landed on, and then I am able to continue through the rest of the test. So I would recommend you probably could do the same thing. This would mean that it would make your test take a little bit longer to run, but that's actually what your users are experiencing. So if that bothers you, it probably bothers your users too, and you should fix that so that it's faster. That actually is a side effect that I hadn't actually considered. So you actually start feeling the same pain that your users do when you start testing like your users have to experience. So
that
anyway,
is also something we do at work with the React I18 Next, is that we have we pass in the local as sort of an option, and then if I remember right, in the render function, in the custom render function, we have a use effect that sets the language again, and then we have the normal providers that you mentioned. But yeah, and that should work.
Yeah. And so that's what I recommend most of the time. There is an alternative to this, and that is you mock out your localization library so that instead of trying to render the actual text, it renders the ID of the content that you're trying to render, and then you select by the text ID. So you'd still use all the same things like find by label or find by role and with the name or whatever, but instead of like the actual text that appears for English, for example, you would just use the ID. And some people prefer this. I do not. I think it's better to use the default language text, whatever that default language is. But yeah, if that's too much work or something, then you can just go with the ID. One of the reasons that people prefer going with the ID rather than the actual text is because they're worried that the people who are changing the localization translation strings or whatever, the people who are changing the content are going to change it and then it will break your test. And I would say I want my test to break if they change it. Like if they change from email to username or vice versa, like let's say in our login form, it was username and then we change it to email. Well, that would change the user's expectation of what's expected in there. And so I would want my test to fail so that I could even potentially change my implementation. Like, oh, now I need to say that this input field is not type text, it's actually type email. So yeah, like most of the time, when those sorts of like content changes end up breaking your test, it's actually fine because it's really easy to fix those. Like it's very clear what change caused the breakage, and it's really clear what the breakage happened. It says, oh, I couldn't find the text that said username, and it shows you all the output. You're like, oh yeah, changed to email, and you look at what commit broke that test. Like it's so easy to fix those. So I'm never really concerned about that. And then often I want to be made aware of when those things break anyway. So that's why I prefer using the default language. And then the next thing that people ask is, well, okay, so do I need to run my tests in every language that we support? And I'd say no, don't bother with that. I don't think that it's worthwhile. I mean, maybe, but yeah, I don't think it's worthwhile. Yeah. So anyway, hopefully that was sort of useful and helpful, and good luck. Okay, Stephanie had this question this morning. And so Stephanie, I don't know if you're in the Zoom call. It doesn't look like you are, but you're trying to build your own version of the Bookshelf app from total scratch. This is actually very awesome, an awesome thing to do. You'll notice that as we go from branch to branch, there are a number of changes that happen that we did not do in the course of the videos. And the reason for this is that a lot of it is just do the same thing that we did, just in a bunch of other components. And so I don't feel like it's all that valuable necessarily to just continue rehashing the same stuff. Certainly not with videos and stuff. I feel like that's something you can practice on your own and then reference the finished version if you need to. And so that's why you'll see that those jumps as they come along. So it may be a little bit tricky. And there's also plenty of things that happen behind the scenes in the Bookshelf app that aren't really the sort of thing that you would do in a real application. There aren't a lot of those, but there are a handful of those sorts of things. And so like, I certainly don't show those in the videos, but you may need to reference the repo to figure out like how that works. You may not even know why I did it. I may not know why I did it anymore. Like some of these edge case things, yeah, it doesn't really apply in a real world application. But anyway, you totally can do it, and it would be beneficial to your learning. Absolutely. What I would recommend actually is don't rebuild the Bookshelf app, build something else. You'll be way better off doing that. So you build the Bookshelf app with the videos and follow along, do the exercises, but then go and build a different thing entirely. And you can do a clone of something else if you want to, but doing that will give you a lot more bang for your buck or bang for your time, whatever. Yeah, it'll be more useful. Anyway, you're totally cool to do it if you want to. Yes, so the specific issue with React Query, the dev tools for React Query, I don't know. I've never seen this before. And I can't read this language, so I don't know what that says. Yeah, I don't know what this is. It looks like that's coming from DevTools.js. That's a console log. At line 48. I wonder. I don't know whether that's my DevTools or React Query DevTools file. So let's look at bookshelf. Or actually, I've got it right here. DevTools. Oh, yeah, right here. Let's look at line 48. Yeah, okay, so that looks like that's coming in from here. I'm guessing that you added a console log in here, Stephanie. And this hover stuff is just to know when to show the DevTools or not. So if we turn those on, then when you hover over the bottom part of the screen, then the DevTools show up. But what I wanted to avoid was the thing that you see often is, like, most of the time when somebody implements this, they're going to say on mouse over, then expand it, on mouse out, then make it go away. But what happens if I do this? I come out. That does not trigger on mouse out. And so then if I come back in like this, then it actually doesn't wouldn't disappear. And so that's why I have this event listener that says, okay, let's just on the body, we'll listen for all mouse moves, and we'll set the hovering state accordingly. And when we call set hovering with the same value, so this is actually going to get called a lot. But when you call it with the same value as it had before, then it doesn't trigger a re-render. So it's fine to do things this way. It's not going to be a performance problem or anything. So anyway, yeah, that's what it's supposed to do. So I'm not sure what the issue is that you're running into, Stephanie, because I don't know what that says. And it doesn't, yeah, that doesn't even look like this is in the bookshelf app that you're building. I'm not sure. So yeah, if you need some further help on that, then I'm happy to share screens and stuff. If you show up before I have to go, then we can do that and see if we can figure that out. But hopefully some of what I said was useful. Good luck. Hello. Sherry is asking again, another question. Oh, yeah. Did I answer your question, Sherry? Is this just...
Yes, you did. Sorry, that's
no worries.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. Afraid of the Zoom call. It's okay, Ibra. I'm gonna say Ibra. Hopefully, I'm saying it right. Don't worry. We're all friends here. Stuttering is a thing that lots of, I don't know like what percentage of people, but I know plenty of people have stuttering issues, and that's totally fine. We will be happy to have you. Either way, you can join us or not. And you can feel free to ask questions in the Discord too. Yago is asking, when building a custom component hook that accepts a callback, when do you use one over the other? Assuming they use callback one only when you can run the effect again. Yeah, so let's take a look. Oh, I see. Yeah, it really kind of depends. Like, so I actually wrote about this recently on as one of the Epic React articles. Yeah, this one. And here I kind of describe some of the trade-offs that you make between the two options. And so this actually is a live thing, and you can see what the differences are. So the old default with classes would basically say, we don't care about closures. We care about the instance and whatever the value is at that time. This is like your use live ref sort of thing. That's the same thing. And then actually use live ref is kind of like simulating the old default with hooks. So the problem here is if you look at post number 3, that is not enabled, or it's not favorited, but post number 2 is. So if I click on post number 2 and then I switch to post 3, it takes 3 seconds for that to go through. You'll notice post number 3 all of a sudden gets favorited. after that 3-second delay, and post number 2 is still favorited. So that's the trade-off that you're making here, is because it's saying, I just want whatever the current value is. Well, the current value changed from the time that I pressed the button to the time that I ended up switching the tab. So that's something to keep in mind and to be concerned about.
Yeah, you can circumvent that if you like. On my example, you're calling like cbref.current like straight away. If you assign it to a variable inside the use effect, then you're making sure you're getting the value from that render, right?
Yes, yeah, you could absolutely do that. Then it makes me wonder, why would you do this over just this? Because that's what the new default is with hooks, is it just closes over those values.
It's more like an implementation detail, because otherwise you're gonna have to tell people that they need to use callback before they pass in the callback.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's true. Yeah, I think I'd need to see like an actual implementation of this. But yeah, I think I understand what you're suggesting. I'm just trying to think of like, that seems like there could be a problem with that.
Yeah, I can try and make an example and bring it back next time.
Yeah. Sorry, I feel like it's at the edge of my brain. Hold on a second. So we're gonna, if we wanted to avoid that problem, we'd go with this approach. And right here on the next line after this one, you're saying we'd say, callback equals cbref or something. Or actually, I guess what it would be is, now I'd need to see a real implementation. It's hard to think about those sorts of problems with contrived examples. So yeah, if you want to build something up, I feel like that may be problematic, but maybe not. It may be okay.
Sure, I'll build something.
Cool. All right, sweet. That's everything in the Discord. We got 15 minutes though, so if anybody wants to ask last questions before we take off, then that sounds good. Or I can just
a follow-up question would be, Yago said that that would be an implementation detail. I'm wondering, is it something good to, or is it something that we should try to avoid when, for example, writing a library?
Yeah.
Because we could document that part, like, hey, your function needs to be wrapped in a use callback, for example.
Yeah, I can give you 2 examples or 2 opposing examples of this, both from Tanner Lindsley, actually. So Tanner has React Query, and he also has the React Virtual. So if we go to React Virtual, I don't think, is React Virtual on that site yet? Yeah, I guess not. Right here. So in React Virtual, he has one function here, estimate size, and this one has to use callback. You cannot avoid it. It says must be memoized using use callback. Really important. It has to be memoized. And so I haven't actually talked with him about this. So this would be an interesting question to ask him, of why he went with this approach of saying, hey, this has to be memoized, rather than doing what he did in React Query. I might be able to take a guess, but I'll just show you React Query here really quick. With the queries, you'll notice that, yeah, actually most of his examples, let me see if
my guess, Kent, is that he cares about when that callback changes in that case. So I think that the implementation goes like, if you care about when the function changes, then you should wrap it in a callback. Otherwise, if you don't care, like it's an inline function that is not going to trigger a re-render, or you don't want to run the effect when it changes, I think that's fine. Those are the trade-offs, at least when I do those 2 approaches that I see. Like, and the const thing that I said for you to save the callback value is like, if you do .current, it's going to be across renders the current value. If you do const inside the use effect, then you're assigning that identity from that render when the function was called. So you don't get the like, it may change between when you run the effect and something else. So you're just assigning that identity in there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this would be fine to assign cbref.current to a variable. It wouldn't really make sense in this example, but for it in the closure. So then here's a quick example where he's using useQuery inside of this to-dos component. And this is creating an arrow function right there. Typically, if you just put this callback into a use effect, then that's going to trigger an up or call the use effect every render, which you wouldn't want to do. And so he's using this sort of approach or this pattern under the hood to avoid doing that. But then, yeah, like Iago said, over here, he doesn't want to put that inside of his own use callback. He actually does want you to be able to control from the outside when you want the whatever effect he has to change the size of things. He wants you to be able to control when that happens. And so presumably you'd have some sort of calculation done here to make a size estimate, and maybe you're using some scoped variables, and so then you could control that a little bit more. So it comes with the drawback of having to document like, hey, you've got to memoize this, otherwise you're going to get infinite re-renders or whatever, or like things are just going to, my use effects are going to rerun every render. But it comes with the benefit of me being able to actually control that from the outside. So yeah, it's pretty all over the place. There are a couple of trade-offs there, but it's good to understand those trade-offs, and it's nice that we get to make that choice.
Although in use query, the keys for the use query is basically the same thing as dependency array. So
yeah, and actually it's interesting. Yeah, it would be an interesting idea to yeah, no, the way he did it was great, and yeah, that's a good observation, Peter. There was one thing that that made me think about. Oh yeah, so there's another way that you could approach this sort of thing, and that is get rid of the use effect from your code. So what you're ultimately what you're trying to do is you've got a dependency array here, and you can either put the callback in it, or you can do the live ref idea and not have to put the callback in it. And each of these come with the trade-offs that we've been talking about. The other thing that you can do is instead of having the use effect inside of your custom hook, you just expose what the use effect does and then make the user call use effect. And then they have total control on when that runs. This actually comes with a nice benefit, and we do it in Epic React. Some of you might already know what I'm talking about. If we look at my, utils, what is it? Hooks, here we go. The use async hook does this exact same thing. So instead of having all of the async logic being managed inside of a use effect, I actually have all the async logic being managed. Like what I would put in the use effect is right here, but then I put that within my own memoized callback that I return, and then the users of this thing have to use the use callback themselves. And so an example of this is, let's see, components rating. I think I use this in here, maybe. Nope, not in there. Status buttons, here we go. So, oh, actually, no, that doesn't even happen in a use effect. That ends up happening in an event handler, which is nice that I get to have that that sort of control, but that's not what I was trying to show you. Here, we'll just look for use async. I think it's actually on the Discover page. We might have one of those. Auth context, maybe. There we go. Yep. So in our auth provider, I use async here, but we don't actually trigger anything until we get to the use effect. But now I'm in charge of the use effect, so I get to decide when I trigger a rerun of this effect, when I'm synchronizing the state of the world with the state of my app. In this case, it is trying to get the initial data loaded for our app. And yeah, anyway, it works out really nicely that way. So I get a lot more control. So there are different ways to approach this problem, and they each come with different trade-offs. I'm glad that Tanner went the way he did with use query. If we had to do a use effect every time we wanted to use query, that would be super annoying. And so I'm glad he went with that approach. But having the flexibility with a hook like this use async hook, I think is worthwhile. And I like that. So yeah, anyway, and actually you can do the same sort of thing with use query, where you can say, hey, use query, I don't want you to actually run. And then you just explicitly call the run function yourself, or I think he calls it like rerun or something like that. I can't remember. I didn't write it. So, okay, cool. Let's see if there are any last questions. Yes, and actually, Yago, as we were talking, I was thinking that exact same thing. It would be cool. This is definitely a good pattern to put in there. When I update Epic React, I'm going to slim down the control props pattern because there's a bunch of extra stuff in there that like you don't really do that often. It's just not as generally applicable. So I'm going to slim that one down. And I think I've been thinking about adding something like this too. This is a pretty common pattern. And having all three of those different patterns and talking about the trade-offs would be really interesting there. So, okay, cool. I think we're going to wrap up unless anybody has anything to ask before we take off. We're good? Okay, thanks everybody. This was a good time. We'll see you next week. And yeah, you all rock. Have a great weekend and stuff.